In a world where left is up and right is apparently wrong, do souls make sense of it all? Or at least have fun trying? Gear up, friends, for Chicken and the Dawg. Welcome to another episode of Chicken and the Dawg. I am the dog, and with me, as always, is the guy that is known to have a little strut in his step, the chicken. What up, Doug?
Me and Travolta.
Yeah, for sure. You and Travolta.
Don't forget our producer, B-Dog.
What up, B?
Yo, how's it going?
Living the dream, brother. Living the dream. Look, man. All right. So a couple things before we get started on this episode, right? We had a chicken scratch moment brought to you by OTC Kennels on the last show, right? And it was a question posed to our audience: who has a bigger man crush on Lane Kiffin, Eli Drinkowitz, or your beloved dog? And it was overwhelmingly favored the dog.
How you doing?
Yeah. So, we're going to keep having those type of questions, man, that's coming through. We had a great response to it. Yeah, I mean, we love doing things like that. So, yeah, I think
Color
that's all.
me
Oh,
shocked.
yeah. What's that?
Color me shocked.
Yeah, you shouldn't be. Look, I know, and one other thing before we get started, man, I talked about last week, we were going to be video this week, and that just some scheduling conflicts and just trying to get everything set up to do that kind of pushed us off one more week, but we should be up and running next week, and you will be able to see my beautiful face as the world needs to.
We're not going to get anywhere through false advertising.
This is true. So, all right, now let's get into the show, right? So, we are going to recap the Texas A&M Aggies. And they had a pretty interesting season. They were 9-3. They kind of fell into that category of, the South Carolina, the Alabama, the Ole Miss. But they're also one of those schools that weren't out there like kind of like Missouri, where they weren't one of the ones that were screaming up and down, we belong in the playoffs, we belong in the playoffs. And there's a reason for that. And so let's just jump right in this thing, right? Okay, so they were not 9-3. They were 8-4. They lost 4 games. They lost 3 conference games, but they did lose an overall 4 games, right? They opened up with a number 7. Huh?
Oh, yeah. You're right.
Yeah.
I miscounted an L.
Well, never mind. I'm going to leave that one alone. You are dyslexic. So
it's true.
You can easily, L, but there's usually a green for a W and a red for the L. So I didn't know you were colorblind as well.
I'm a rooster, baby.
Yeah, you're something. All right. So look, they opened up the season, Texas A&M with a Notre Dame, number 7 Notre Dame at the time. And A&M lost, man, 23-13. So everybody was like, okay, is A&M for real, or is A&M not as good as they thought they would be? Is Notre Dame for real? And Notre Dame proved that they were for real because they went to the national championship, so, but anyway, they lost 23-13, and then they played McNeese. I don't even know who that is. Beat them 52-10. Then they took on the Fighting Flobies with Florida and beat them 33-20. Then they beat Bowling Green 26-20. Then they took on the Fighting Pitmans, beat them 21-17. Then Mizzou, at the time was number 9, beat them 41-10, the old evil one. Then they took on Mississippi State and beat them 34-24 again, who didn't. Then they took on a number 8 LSU and beat them 38-23. So yes, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 straight wins for the Aggies. So season was looking really good for those guys, right? Well, then they had to go to Colatown. And this is the one game that the Chicken has a lot of distaste for the Aggies, and he's going to get into that in a few minutes. I'm sure he's going to talk about some things that they do, and he doesn't like it. And I just believe it's honestly because the Aggies have had, ever since Texas A&M came to the SEC, A&M was that team that South Carolina had to play every year from the West, right? And they pretty much have owned Carolina most of that. I don't know their actual record. I'm sure the Chicken can tell you what that is, but they've kind of owned him, right? So I think his distaste for that, I think he's a little sour about that, but that's just my opinion, which will cost you nothing. But anyway, South Carolina, man, just rolled all over them, 44-20. It was nasty. Then they came back and beat New Mexico State 38-3. Then they lost to Auburn. This is where the wheels fall off for A&M. They lost to Auburn in 4 overtimes. And, we recapped Auburn's season like, 14 months ago, because that's how far back they were. They were at the bottom of the SEC for the most part. So Auburn didn't have a very good season, but they beat the Aggies and really threw the Aggies out of contention as far as getting into the playoffs. Then they rolled in with and had to play a Texas, and at the time Texas was number 3. And look, I think the world, or at least Texas fans, and I'm saying the state of Texas fans, football fans, were very happy to see this game come back, because it's been quite some time since this game, and we talked about that when during the right before they played this game. But Texas handled them in 17-7. Then they go in and fight in a bowl game in the Las Vegas Bowl, SRS Distribution Las Vegas Bowl, and they lose to the Fighting Prophylactics 35-31. So all in all, the season wasn't bad, but they had some bright spots, but it was kind of like, okay, they're just trying to find themselves.
Yeah, keep looking. November was a tough month. Like a overcooked turkey, they dropped 3 out of 4.
Mm-hmm.
Starting off there with the South Carolina Gamecocks, and I was looking up the box score of that game the other day, and Marcel Reed, by this point in the season, has kind of established himself as the guy at the quarterback position. He comes into that game that evening in Columbia, throws for 206 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. He ran the ball 16 times for 46 yards that night, does not cross the great goal line on the ground that night. Marcel didn't, but old Lenoris Sellers, 244 yards in the air, 2 touchdowns on the ground, 108 yards and a touchdown. I think the better man won.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that, man. South Carolina, I don't care what anybody says. South Carolina overall, and I don't think many people can argue if they have half a brain, was a better team than the Aggies were last year. They just were. And people can say, well, this or that or what have you. I just think overall, South Carolina, they had a better defense. I think overall they had a better offense. And, and we talked about the stat. I said something about, the win-loss against in that series. A&M favored is up 8-2, man. So in the last 10 years, A&M's won 8 of those games, man. So good job for South Carolina. Look, you got to play them again this year, and I think South Carolina can beat them again. I mean, I do. I think South Carolina's doing good. Now, the one thing I will say as far as A&M in this season, remember, they started out with a new coach. So what kind of effect did that have on the program?
I wouldn't think as much, because where you see the wheels fall off again is in November. So just like you mentioned, they've just come off winning 7 games straight. Then they've got to go to Columbia and face the Gamecocks, and they got thumped.
Hmm.
In the first half of that ball game, it's a competitive matchup. And then South Carolina comes out in the second half and shut them out in the second half. If you look at the remainder of the month, the only 3 games they've got left in November, they beat New Mexico State. Okay, well, number 1, you're an SEC school, so you should. Number 2, you're Texas A&M, which I would consider an upper echelon SEC school, so you most certainly should beat New Mexico State. So, okay, cool. They take care of business. Then they lose on the Plains in 4 overtimes, and then they lose to Texas. So to say that, Elko has some type of an influence here, I don't see that. I think that he did a great job getting the most that he could out of the talent that he had on that roster throughout this season. You strung 7 wins together consecutive, and you get tired in the last half of the last quarter of the year. I think that's what happened to A&M. I think that what they're going to do is continue to build this roster, shore up this roster, and bring in the talent that they need and the stamina that they need to make it through a very competitive schedule.
You made a good point, man, and I think you and I can talk about this for a little bit, and not beat it to a dead horse, but we talk about it time and over and over and over and over and over how good the SEC is. Then you just said they got tired, right? The stamina that you have to play in the SEC is second to none. And look, I don't think the Big Ten is as deep and has to have as much stamina. Now, yes, I would say that they are next in line compared to the SEC. But I mean, look at this, man. They played. We're going to do conference games, man. I'll even take away Notre Dame, but they had to play Florida, Arkansas, the evil one, Mississippi State, LSU. Man, I mean, other than Mississippi State, and look, Mississippi State was coming along. They were trying to figure some things out. Van Buren was doing pretty good, so they were getting some offensive going. But man, I mean, you're talking 5 SEC games, man, that they had to play again. Those guys got beat up. You got to have stamina to be in the SEC.
Well, you do, but here's something else that I'm trying to allude to, that I think there will be good things down the road, and we talk about this every week during these recap shows. There's good news coming, but you got to wait for it in the forecast show. But if you look at each position group, the quarterback group was rated a B by collegefootballdepth.com. The running back group, B plus. The wide receivers, a B. The tight ends, a C plus. The offensive line, they got an A, so that's good. You've got some good strength there at protecting your quarterback. Maybe opening up some holes for a almost pretty good running back room. Defensively, they score pretty well. They got an A minus for their starters on the defensive line, a B plus for the linebackers, so not that great, but an A plus for their defensive backfield. So
Wow.
Their strength really at A&M last year was defensive. So when you get in these matchups with some of these, stronger teams, deeper teams, if you don't have the depth and the strength at those offensive positions, you're not going to put a lot on the board. If you look at that game that they lost to Texas, it's 17-7. So they hold Texas to 17, but they don't have the weapons to get on the board for more than one score.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, the out of the 4 games that they lost, I mean, yeah, they lost to Notre Dame, and they had 23 points. Now that Notre Dame game, all right, so I'm gonna just talk about that game for a second, because that had a lot of, it's the first game of the season, all the nerves, first year coach Elko, that's great. But who was Elko going up against at Notre Dame? One, he was going against a Marcus Freeman that's been coaching at Notre Dame for a couple of years ago. He's getting his program moving in the right direction. But who was quarterback at Notre Dame? Riley Leonard. Who was Riley Leonard's head coach in 2023?
Mike Elko.
Elko. That's right. So that's, that whole story and all of that. I get that. And Elko's first game at Texas A&M, but they only scored 13, and their defense allowed 23 points against Riley Leonard. Now, go down to the South Carolina, after that, they allowed Florida. They only allowed 20 points. Arkansas, they only allowed 17. Brady Cook and the evil one only allowed 10 points. And Mizzou's always known to have a great offense, right? So Mississippi State, they allowed 24 points. LSU, we talk about Nussmeier all the time. How good was he last year in the air? He only allowed them 23 points. But South Carolina, it's like the wheels completely came off when it comes to their defense, and they allowed Lenore Sellers in that offense to score 44 points. That's crazy.
I don't think they spent enough time at yell practice the night before.
No. Ah! Oh, here we go with the yell practice, right? Look, man, Go ahead.
I was just going to say, everybody's got to be good at something.
I've mentioned this on the show before, man. My very first, I was a military brat, right? So my love for Georgia, I was born in Alaska, raised everywhere, right? So my love for Georgia and the Georgia Bulldogs came from when my dad was stationed in Augusta at Fort Gordon, and in the early 80s, and this is when Herschel was at Georgia, and so everything was Georgia, and that's kind of where my dad loved the atmosphere of the Bulldogs, and we kind of picked that up and so forth and so on. So that's where my love for Georgia. I wasn't born in this area like the chicken, born and raised right outside of Colatown, man. So it was bred in him to be a Gamecock, right? It wasn't for me. So fast forward into my 20s or 30s, late 20s, early 30s. I'm living in Texas, and a friend of mine by the name of John Ekdahl, man, this guy takes me. He's an A&M grad. I did not go to school. I went and served my country when I got out of high school. But anyway, so John Ekdahl is a grad at A&M, and he's like, hey, man, you want to go to a game? And I was like, man, I would love to go to an A&M game, go to my first college game. And I went. We got there on a Friday, and I went to the stadium, Kyle Field, that Friday night.
Here we go. I think we have a clip of you at the yell practice. Yep, that's it.
That was me. So I did go to the yell practice. Now, I know that you think it's silly, and maybe it is silly to most people, especially, I'm sure it's not silly to the Aggies. But one of the things that I love about college football more than anything is the traditions that each school has. I think that is just second to none. NFL ain't got nothing on that. The traditions, the bonfire A&M until they, freak accident and people got burnt up. Or died or whatever. It was not good. But the yell practice, then they, then they turn the lights off and the lights come back on and people are kissing each other. I did not partake in the smooching. At least I will not admit that. And
I cannot be a fan of any school where the lights come back on and you're making out with your cousin. That's not good.
Look, his lips may or may not have been soft. I'm not going to tell you. So, But anyway, but look, so I mean, look, the tradition was cool, man. Yes, they do a yell practice. They've got these chants, and they don't have cheerleaders on the field. Matter of fact, you're
That
not allowed to go on that field, Jack.
that says a
Um,
lot.
I guess it does.
You can't come on the field unless you're wearing your khaki uniform and you went to yell practice the night before.
I'm never going to convince you that it's a cool tradition, am I?
But you digress.
Yeah. Oh, I'm pulling away from that one. Anyway, John, thank you for taking me that game, man. You made a college football fan out of me from going to that game, and I appreciate it so much. Thanks, dog. But anyway, I digress on that. But look, they must have not have done their yell practice when they played South Carolina because they got thumped.
Yeah, I don't think they were doing a whole lot of practice the entire month of November is what I'm trying to point out here. And then, I mean, for the love of Pete, you go into Las Vegas. You had one job in Las Vegas. One. And 35-31 against the prophylactics? Are we serious? You couldn't find time to yell in Vegas? You couldn't get excited about anything in Vegas? You couldn't wear your khaki pants in Vegas? You couldn't bring the border collie to Vegas? I know that Texas couldn't bring Bevo to Atlanta, but you couldn't bring the border collie to Vegas? And so you get beat by those guys? I just can't.
Now I was in Vegas last month, the month of
With a
February,
border collie?
and wearing khaki pants. And look, I can see there is no doubt. I understand why you can get distracted in Vegas. So maybe they hit the strip the night before and they were out all night on the strip because it just never sleeps. And yeah, but you're right. You had one job, and that's to beat the fake USC. So yeah. And look, I go back to this, talking about that November schedule, man. And you're right, man. The wheels fell off of South Carolina. But that Auburn loss, man. I mean, you got to ask yourself, what happened with their defense, man? If their defense was so good all year long, but they allowed Auburn to score 43 points, man. 43 points. Peyton Thorne had 301 yards. I mean, he had a pick, but he had 2 touchdowns. Their running back, Hunter, man, he had 3 touchdowns and ran for 130 yards. So, I mean, but Auburn hadn't played like that all year. So I don't know, man.
Well, Auburn came out of the gate really quick in that game. I mean, they were up 14-0 at the end of the first quarter. And for the most part, it was A&M just trying to play catch up the rest of the game. And then, of course, let's go into overtime. When you're going to go into overtime, it might as well be time to just start flipping coins at that point. And it's a close loss. It's a heartbreaking loss, but an L nonetheless. And it gives you the third loss on the regular season with one game left to play against the rival Longhorns. And that was a matchup anticipated because they hadn't played in how many years since since A&M had come into the conference?
I think it's been 10 years.
Yeah, it had been a minute since Texas and Texas A&M had faced off on the gridiron, and so there was a lot of buildup going into that one. Of course, Texas is trying to keep things straight to get into the conference championship game, to get into the 12-team playoff. A&M is trying to keep themselves together to have a solid showing, especially against their rival for the first time in since 2011.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of pressure there to wrap up your season after you've already piled on 3 losses.
Yeah, the good thing is if you want to, if and look, they did play at home. They were at Kyle Field, so that gives them a little bit of a nod. But the good thing is their defense seemed to show up on that game. I mean, they only allowed um, Texas for 17 points, man. And what's his name? God, it sucks getting old, man. I can't even think of Texas quarterback now.
Quinn Ewers.
Quinn Ewers, thank you. Quinn Ewers, man. I mean, he's played lights out football all year long and put up some crazy stats. And I mean, he had one touchdown and a pick. He threw for 218 yards, but and ran for 30, almost 30 yards. But Arch came in and ran it. It was, I think that's right. I remember recording this show and talking about this after or before this game, and you and I were talking about that Sark needs to listen to us and quit putting Arch in and confusing that Ewers boy. And look, he put Arch in. He doesn't listen.
Oh, he put Arch in, and at this point in the season, Arch had a few starts during the year for Texas, and obviously we'll get into this more in their recap show. But at this point in the season, if Arch came in, he was going to run the ball.
Yeah.
He either he didn't find opportunity that he liked, or it was going to be a design QB draw. And that's exactly what he did. The 3 snaps he took were for 14 yards on the ground.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that was a very that was a big blow for A&M, man, losing that 4th regular season game. Now, I asked you this question before the show, before we started recording, maybe gave you some time to think. So, the 2 of the coaches, new coaches in the SEC this year, Elko and DeBoer. Out of the 2, who had a better year?
I mean, it's not a fair question. First of all, DeBoer obviously had a better year. He has a 9-3 regular season. Elko has an 8-4 regular season. So just by simple math, he's 1 win up. But he also comes in to a much deeper roster than Elko has. And I believe because he's coming in post Saban, the atmosphere around the program is a lot more positive, a lot more hopeful. You've talked about it, and it's not a wrong word, but you've talked about the expectation around the Alabama Crimson Tide football program. Texas A&M, they've had themselves in this weird position for a while of getting a coach, having a coach establish a success rate of about 8-4, right? I can't remember the gentleman that was the coach before Jimbo.
Kevin Sumlin.
Kevin Sumlin, right? I
Mhm.
loved Kevin Sumlin. I thought he
I did
was a great
too.
coach. I thought he was a great fit for Texas A&M, and I really felt like he had them going in the Sumlin trajectory. Like there was going to be better stuff to come with Kevin Sumlin at the helm of Texas A&M, but the boosters got tired of going 8-4, and so they make the move to bring in Jimbo Fisher. Well, that was a flop of an idea,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because what does he do? The exact same thing. I don't remember exactly what the win-loss stat line was, but at one point where they had identical time in, and it might have been the 5-year mark, the records between Kevin Sumlin's Aggies and Jimbo Fisher's Aggies were the same. There was no improvement one way or the other. Then they get tired of that. Well, we don't like the Jimbo era anymore. And they spent how much money to buy him out? 80 some odd $1 million, $78 million. I forget what the number was.
It was sick.
It was ridiculous. I mean, please hire me. You could fire me next week for half that, a quarter of that. Heck, I'll take 15%.
I'll
And
take 10.
right?
So
But for that kind of money, they fire him, and now you've gone and brought in Elko. Now, I think Elko's going to be a good fit for the program. I think he's a
I do
good
too.
coach. The question, how long? And here's your chicken scratch moment, brought to you by OTC Kennels, off the chain kennels, OTC Kennels on Instagram, Facebook. Get out there on your social media and find these guys. Your chicken scratch moment, B-Dog, if you will. Does Elko stay long enough, or does he get an opportunity to go somewhere else, or does Texas A&M do what Texas A&M does, and they get tired of giving a guy an opportunity to build a program?
Ooh. All right. So there's so many layers in what you just said. So I'm going to get to your chicken scratch in just a moment. Okay. So Sumlin's record at A&M was 51-26. Jimbo Fisher's record was 45-25. Right. So Sumlin had a better record. Now, there's the stark difference between the two, in my opinion, is Jimbo at least had a couple years of NIL. Sumlin didn't. So if Sumlin would have had the opportunity to recruit using A&M's oil money, which is big,
And yell practice.
and the Yale practice,
Ah!
would Sumlin end up being up? Would he still be there? Would he have a national championship? Who did he coach? Now, I'm sure it was probably a full-time job. That's right. He coached Johnny Manziel, and he made Johnny Manziel. I think he coached him the best that he could and keep him between the lines. But Johnny Manziel was a great athlete. Fantastic player. And so I think if someone would have been there during the NIL era, he could still be there and have a national championship.
Well,
Now,
and you mentioned Johnny Manziel. So let me answer your theory there a little bit by another question. You talk about Johnny Manziel, and I think, isn't that what makes a great head coach, is when you get a Manziel that you still have the structure around your team, but you let Manziel be Manziel. You let Jordan be Jordan. When he wants to pull up and take that shot, he takes the shot. Right? Mike, what do you want to do here? You still have the structure of, I'm in charge of everything else going on here, but I'm going to let you do what you do, because that's where points come from. That's where victory comes from. And in that way, by not managing that level of a player, you are managing that level of a player.
yeah, nobody in the NFL could manage Manziel. They couldn't
manage him. But what I think that translates to, as far as Kevin Sumlin is concerned, is not a national championship at Texas A&M. I think Kevin Sumlin, unless it turned into what I believe we're seeing with Lane Kiffin, your boyfriend, at Ole Miss, where he's kind of putting down roots and setting up his program there. Unless it would have been that for Kevin Sumlin, I think what we would have seen is his having the opportunity to move on to a bigger program. Would Kevin Sumlin have been a name? Now this might upset some elephants, but if he had had the career that I think he was capable of, would he have been a name on Alabama's radar?
Potentially, right? So, Kevin Sumlin left A&M after getting paid. His buyout, I think he got paid, man. So as much as I think that he didn't, I'm not saying he wanted to leave A&M, but he didn't leave A&M broke, right? So he goes to Arizona.
He did by Jimbo standards.
That's true. Everybody did by Jimbo standards, right? But A&M, he goes to Arizona. Is his heart into it? I don't know. He doesn't do very well at Arizona, but could he have been that Alabama coach? Maybe. Now, I'm going to get back to your chicken scratch question brought to you by OTC Kennels, off the chain kennels. Will Elko, if being very successful at Texas A&M, would he leave to go to another program? I'm going to say no, because A&M, in my opinion, is that program that they're like an Ole Miss, right? Maybe even a step above an Ole Miss when it comes to rankings, because you got the blue bloods. The blue bloods are Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama. Then you got the Georgias that I believe is right behind that. Then you got the LSUs that's right behind them, right in line with those guys. A&M and Ole Miss are that lower upper tier of programs. But could they bump up to that next level? Like a Georgia did, getting that inching up a little bit more. Could A&M do it? Well, they've got the pockets to do it if they can put a coach around the team that can do it. And Elko might be that coach. Elko stays and brings Texas A&M some national championships. That's what I think.
It's possible. A lot of it is going to depend, and you allude to this when you talk about their deep pockets. A lot of it is going to depend on what he can do in the portal, how he can manage that. Let's just look real quick at what's happened with A&M just since the season. They've lost 22 players off of their roster, either to a transfer that's already gone to completion or guys that are still in the portal. Now, if you're still in the portal, technically you can come back, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's overall adding those two up that they've lost 22 players.
Did they have anyone that are big that was big impact on them?
Well, I mean, Connor Weigman is going. Originally, he had transferred and then has since announced that he's just going to go pro or try his hand in the draft. Jalen Henderson was a 3-star in their quarterback room. Their biggest player, in my estimation, that left is Noah Thomas, and he went to your beloved Bulldogs. He was their number one receiver, a 4-star recruit, 6'6". He had 72 targets, 39 catches, 572 yards, and 8 touchdowns last year. And he left. Behind him, Cyrus Allen, who was number 4 on the depth chart at wide receiver. By the way, number 2 and number 3 on the depth chart graduated. But Cyrus Allen, number 4, he's transferred out. So all 4 of your top wide receivers are gone. Your tight end class or room wasn't all that great anyway. Down to your defensive line, a 5-star Gabriel Brownlow Dindy, sophomore, former 5-star recruit. He's transferred out, going to the University of South Carolina. There's some solid players. Enai White, a former junior 4-star recruit, he's transferred out. He's going to Penn State off of that D line. So there's going to be some moves that he's going to have to make. Now, he does still have former 5-star sophomore DJ Hicks in that defensive tackle room. But yeah, some movement that he's going to have to make. The DB room, which we said earlier was the best position really on the defensive side of the ball, looks like they're probably only going to get stronger. None of those guys, especially the top of that A-plus group, left to go to the transfer portal or NFL or graduated, anything like that. So pretty solid. So I think he's got a nice little base to build on. But the question is, can he manage the portal the way that a Lane Kiffin does? Okay, the way that a Shane Beamer does. Because he inarguably he's got probably some of the deepest pockets around.
What was the first name you said? Who?
I'm not gonna. He doesn't mean to me what he means to you,
Oh, okay.
so I don't feel the need.
Lane Kiffin.
How you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, he does not fill my daydreams in the same way that he does yours.
I will not be wearing my Lane Kiffin shirt when we go live next week. I promise you.
Yeah, you will. It'll just be underneath.
This, all right, maybe so. Um, yeah, it's really going to depend. I mean, look, I think Elko had a good season overall, right? He definitely came out of the gate really strong. 2/3 of the season was fantastic. Can he do this again next year? And we'll talk about that on the forecast show, right? But it with what you're saying, how many people he lost and the talent that he lost and who's going in the draft. I guess we're going to find out what kind of coach he is, right?
You'll have a better measurement. You talked earlier about first year coaches and trying to make that comparison. You'll have a much better measurement, I think, after next year for both of the two guys that you mentioned, both DeBoer and Elko. If you look at, we talk about it all the time. The schedule for these teams, conference wise, is identical next year. It's just flipped home and away.
Yes,
So
right.
he's got to make it through that beef of the schedule again next year. And then you'll see, okay, what was this guy able to do with transfer portal? What was he able to attract in true freshman recruiting versus what is DeBoer doing at Alabama? I'm on record as saying I think he's going to be just fine at Alabama. I really do. I think he's going to do a good job. I think he's taken the team in a solid direction. Not a different one than they've already been going in, but he's tweaked how that engine's running a little bit. I think they're going to be okay. But I also believe that Elko for A&M is going to have these Aggies, yell practice or no, going in the right direction.
I hope so. I mean, look, I'm gonna pull for the guy. I think he's a guy with great character or whatever. And look, you talk about next season. This upcoming season for them, they do play Notre Dame again. Is one of their non-conf games, and the good thing about that is Notre Dame is going to be. They're going to look a little different too. Riley Leonard's gone, right? So I don't think they're going to. Should we name the exemption to be able to play, 7 or 8 or 15 seasons, the Stetson Bennett extension?
I hope that they're going to stop doing that at some point.
Yeah, I hope so too. You get 5 years.
Golly. Yeah, it used to be you got 5 to play 4 and then COVID.
COVID.
But whatever. At some point, the world will wake up and we'll stop doing this and realize that, hey, that young man, it's got a full beard and 3 children on the sidelines. He needs to be in the league.
He's not necessarily considered a young man anymore.
If you can play college football and cash Social Security checks, you might be past your eligibility.
That could be a Jeff Foxworthy saying. So yeah, all in all, A&M had I'm not going to say a down season. I'm not going to say an up season. I'm just going to say they had a season, right? I think there's some bright things that you can look at. I think there's some great takeaways from their season, and I think that there's some not so bright moments. Good luck next year when you play South Carolina, because I think they're going to give you another loss back to back. You heard it first from the dog.
You think they're going to beat Carolina again, or you think Carolina's going to beat? I'm sorry, you phased out for me for just a second.
I'm sorry. No, I think Carolina is going to beat them 2 years.
I mean, look, that's not going to hurt my feelings, but again, we looked up over the past 10 years what the record was, right? Carolina's beaten them twice, period. Not just in the last 10 years, just period.
Mm.
So that's still a mountain to climb. Now, yeah, we've made steps under Beamer. In fact, both of those wins came under Shane Beamer. So that's a great thing. But I look at the Texas A&M game now very similar to the way that I look at the game that Carolina plays against Missouri, where and that's a coin flip. And looking at things going into next year, do I think that Carolina, as of today, is positioned in a better spot to win that game against A&M? Yes, I do. But we got to go to A&M next year to play that game, to Kyle Field. And don't mistake it, home field advantage means a lot. That
Oh,
12th man means a lot. I'm sure it means an awful lot to those good people to be able, in College Station, to be able to yell and scream all night long on their own field and do all their little yelling practice.
yeah, and they keep making that stadium bigger and bigger. I think, and I think our young producer can probably tell us this pretty quickly, but I think they've got the second largest stadium in the SEC behind Tennessee. I believe they're over 100,000 people. I believe, and
Yep,
so
they are.
yeah, so you're right. I mean, that's allowed. Those people love some A&M. I mean, they love their Aggies, man. Them boys can play. And so, yeah, you got to go. You got to go to College Station next year. And are they the second biggest?
No,
You got
they've got number
LSU.
one. Yep.
Oh, Kyle Fields number one.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
number one.
How we doing?
And I don't know if you want to count Neyland Stadium or not, because I've heard that you've got to sit on a lap to get in there.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Well,
Yeah. So, I mean, next year, man, it's gonna be really interesting to see how Aggies, how them Texas A&M Aggies, what it's gonna look like, man. It should be very interesting. Look, man, I don't think we can close this show out, man, without talking about two teams. I mean, March Madness is fixing to happen. The bracket is set, right? And I know that we're SEC football guys, and that's what we talk about, 99% of the time. But, the bracket's out, man. And out of the 16 teams that's in the SEC, only two didn't make it. So 14 teams made it to the bracket. And I know what you're all thinking. Yeah, I'm sure one of those teams that was left out was the Georgia Bulldogs. No, Georgia made the bracket for the first time since 2015. So great job, guys. 10 years, man. And what's really surprising is Carolina didn't make it. And they usually have a pretty good basketball team. So, yeah, weird stuff. I mean, look, Georgia's got to play Gonzaga. Gonzaga? Did I say that right? Yeah.
the second time, yes.
Hip Hop Anonymous. So, and look, we know Georgia's going to take them down. Georgia's probably going to go all the way. You heard it here first.
All the way to the bus, back to the hotel.
That's right. I mean, I don't really expect anything, big to come from that. I mean, but look, they made it, and that's a good thing. Just next week, man, we're going to talk about. We should be on video, hopefully. That's the plan, and we are going to talk about your South Carolina Gamecocks.
Get cocky, baby.
I'm sure you're getting excited about that. Look, and then what's really cool, guys, in a couple weeks, the Masters is going to happen, right? And the Chicken and I are actually going to Wednesday's practice round. We're going to go watch the par 3 tournament. That's going to be great. And then we're going to try to do a show right after that, the very next day, and just kind of recap what we've seen out there, who we like, how many pimento cheese sandwiches did we eat? Was the egg salad good or not good? Those are things that we'll be talking about. Look, I've been at that tournament a couple different times, 3-4 different times. This will be the Chicken's first time out to see the hollow ground of the Augusta National. So these are just some of the things that we got going on. Look, man, I ain't got anything else. Do you?
Nah, I'm all crowed out.
All right, guys. Well, Bryson, what you got? You got anything before we leave?
Yes, sir. If you guys aren't already, go make sure you're following us on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. I'm posting a lot on there, updates on when podcasts come out and other content and whatnot, and also subscribe on YouTube.
Awesome. Thanks, Bryson, for all you do, man. You really bring in a different element to this show, man. Really taking us to that next step, man. We really appreciate you for sure. And your pay raise is coming. So look, man, I got nothing else. Follow us, like Bryson said, like us, share us, love us, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your enemies. Just tell someone about Chicken and the Dawg. Love you. Deuces.
Bye.